My name is Jim King. A brief background, a class of 68 undergrad and MBA 77. In between, I was a Peace Corps volunteer for 2 years in Micronesia after my undergrad period. Spent 2 years teaching in Japan in the city of Kyoto, traveled around the world, came back, taught for a few more years in the public school system, and then decided to make a career change, at which point I entered the GSB, graduated, as I say, in 77. Did a little international banking and consulting, and then sort of stumbled into a career in 1979 in personal financial planning and investment management. I've been doing that now for 31 years, had my own firm for 29 years, and in the course of that experience, I have coached and counseled a number of people who were on the verge of retirement. Certainly, a lot of our planning is around planning for retirement, financial planning, but also life planning. And of course, one of the major issues people confront as they are about to transition from a life dedicated to career and perhaps family as well is a huge change in their identity. I'm now no longer just what I do or who I am at work, but I have to now confront the issue of how will I find meaning for the rest of my life. Of course, it's an issue that we face all through our lives, but it becomes particularly important in the point of our lives when we are transitioning out of traditional work models. And Lili will now continue.
Good morning and welcome to everyone. I'm a BA 71 and an MBA from 76. And my career has included some consulting, some product management, some executive recruiting. Then I started a company called M Squared with another Stanford MBA and Paula Reynolds and a Berkeley MBA, a firm that finds part-time and project work for senior managers. As one of the projects for M Squared, I was invited to do a maternity leave coverage for Margaret King, who was then the Director of Alumni Relations here at the business school. So I did her maternity leave coverage, and then I actually stayed on for a decade, working 1 day a week at the business school doing career coaching. I was sort of 1/10 of what Mercy does these days. But that also, for me, started my career as an executive coach. And the whole last 20 years of my life has been working with people around finding meaningful work, compelling work. I got to do, under the auspices of the business school while I was doing the consulting here, a study in which we were looking for how do we find meaning in work. We actually did 2 of them, 5 years apart. We had about 3,500 alums participate. And the results were that the 2 primary motivators for meaning in work are a steep learning curve and contribution. And if any of you were at the earlier in MEMOD and you saw that slide about learning and what happens to learning in the last half of our life, there's some very interesting challenges. So we are going to have a panel today from some wonderful MBA alums who have each of them found meaning and purpose beyond their professional lives. They have each had a really remarkable journey of discovery about how to identify myself when I am not defined just by my traditional professional life. So each person here is going to, each one of them will introduce themselves and first give you a little story of how they discovered purpose for themselves in their post-professional life. And then, and we'll go through the whole, all 4 of them. And then Jim's going to give a small perspective on legacy and how we think about what we leave behind, what is the greater impact. And then each one of you, you'll hear from each of them again about how they think about themselves and their bigger imprint, if you will. And then we will save the last 20 minutes to open it up for questions for all of you. So welcome and thank you for joining us today, and thank you, panelists, for your stories. I think we'll just go in order. So Arthur, can we start with you?
Yes, my name is Arthur Roth. I am of the class of 49, not 18. And I was just thinking, sitting in this room, if these walls could talk, I think we've all had a lot of experiences in this room, and of course it's passing from the scene, but it's nice to see a few friends, old faces that I remember well here today. Let's see, briefly, my career. When I got out of the business school, I had come back from the war and entered Stanford as a junior. Stanford gave me 6 free credits for being in the Army. It was marvelous. That was great. That was marvelous. Anyway, I got a BA here and went into the business school because I really didn't know what else I wanted to do. My mother said, "Why on earth are you going to a business school? You know, you should, whatever, you know." But anyway, it did not have the cachet that, of course, it does now with its worldwide reputation. I joined Levi Strauss & Company when I left the business school. It was a tiny, tiny regional company with a trademark that was world known by name, but not as a trademark. And I worked myself up, because, in other words, it was often used with a lowercase l. The word Levi's was used with a lowercase l, and so I went through that whole thing in trying to establish the public recognition of the name as a trademark. I went on. I eventually joined the board of that company. And then after 20 plus years, I left to start my own, I quote, retired. Well, I won't be mysterious, but we had gone public. So it meant that a few of us, some of us were well favored, and I was able to do what I wanted to do. I left and established my own management consultation practice. And during that time, I took over a client company, which was a small laboratory company here in Silicon Valley, and we built that up and then sold it. I went back to my consulting practice. Let's see, shall I tell you what I'm doing now? Maybe that would be, okay. I have various activities now. I am just ending a 10-year stint as board chair of a small mutual fund, which has been buffeted by the financial winds. However, I'm about to end that. It's been a very instructive and wonderful experience. And I'll get into more of this later, I analyze plays for production with 2 San Francisco theater companies, one of which is quite well known nationally, the Magic Theater, and another is a small one which began about 7 years ago, the San Francisco Playhouse. I urge all of you who live in this area to remember both of those, but especially that last one, because in a tiny, tiny little theater in downtown San Francisco, they produce plays of incredible artistic impact. Let's see, what else? I'm on the board of the American Jewish Committee in San Francisco, and I focus on international issues. We visit relating to American Jewry and Israel, and I visit consulates constantly, and it indulges an interest I have in foreign affairs. That's been very, very rewarding. I'm about to begin another Stanford ACT project. I have one of my great interests over the past many, many years has been Stanford. And so I've served Stanford, I hope well, in a number of different capacities, but especially for Stanford ACT and on the alumni board. Let me see, have I left anything out? I think that's about it. Okay.
Thank you, Arthur.
You're welcome.
Pat, do you want to tell us your story?
Yes. I'm just going to cover the highlights briefly right now and give you more details in the second segment. I'm Pat Jones. I'm a member of the class of '76. And during my business career, I concentrated on financial analysis. I worked for the Gap stores in a variety of financially oriented positions. I was treasurer of an opera company, and I worked as an entrepreneur, founding, running, and eventually selling an apparel distribution company. But today, I am utilizing the other side of my brain. I am a working artist. I am creating oil paintings of landscapes and still life subjects in a studio in a warehouse in Menlo Park. I have this gorgeous area in which to work, cement floors, high ceilings, skylights, and a roll-up door. It's a dream come true. I show and sell my work through retail establishments and agents and over the internet.
Okay. I'm Ed Kaufman, a member of the class of 1980. I live in Chester County, just on the northwest side of Philadelphia, where I retired from GlaxoSmithKline 4 years ago after a 25-year career. My last job was as the Chief Ethics and Compliance Officer and also the Chief Risk Officer. Interesting jobs, challenging industry, and interesting times. After retirement, and I do say retirement in quotes, I fully expected to spend my time pursuing a lifetime passion for sailing. And indeed, I spend 3 to 4 months a year sailing. And this summer, a friend and I sailed a 53-foot boat across the Atlantic. But after GSK, I really found myself enmeshed in other interests. At our 25th reunion in 2005, I joined my 1980 classmates in co-founding Project Redwood, a social venture initiative focused on extreme poverty. And I served as co-chair of that organization for 3 years. I'm not going to say too much more about Project Redwood right now, except to encourage you to attend the session at 4:45 p.m. today here in Bishop, where we'll be talking about Project Redwood's beginnings, its accomplishments, and our plans for the future. I should say, however, that re-engaging with classmates after 25 years in the intimate way we have is an incredibly rewarding experience. And our classmates, and I say that of all our classes, our classmates are as impressive and interesting today as they were then. I'm also CEO of Minnesota Farms Company, a family-owned farming business in west central Minnesota. We grow corn and soybeans on 7,000 acres. And earlier this week, I was driving an 85,000-pound grain truck. All right, I didn't have to, but it's a heck of a lot of fun. Finally, in a session like this, I really feel compelled to mention family. I'm blessed to have had 2 living ancestors. My mother lived until age 96, and my father just celebrated his 100th birthday. It wreaks havoc with the financial planning, believe me. A frequent traveler and still living in his own home, he nevertheless requires care and attention to him and the rest of my family. My wife, Martha, 4 daughters, 3 of whom live on the West Coast. And I suppose I should mention 2 Portuguese water dogs. Occupies any remaining time, but really serves to provide the precious moments in life. I may be preempting some of the later discussion, but I know I was asked to speak on this panel because of my involvement with Project Redwood. But as I learned more about the panel and realized that the context was really about finding meaning and perhaps focus in life after what we would generally consider a career, it was apparent that I had been selected as an example of someone who clearly hasn't figured it out. I don't know what I want to be when I grow up, but if I were to place a bet, I would say that I will continue to sample broadly for as long as I'm physically and mentally able. Thank you.
Leslye?
My name is Leslye Louie, and I'm from the class of '86, so I haven't had quite as much time to roll up as many chapters as Arthur, but I'm working hard at it. After graduating in 1986, I went to work for Hewlett-Packard. I was there for 20 years, had a fabulous time during the go-go years, and after a few milestones passed, I realized that I could have kept doing what I was doing, running bigger businesses and that sort of thing, but my attention started to wander in terms of wanting to contribute to something bigger and be a part of something that had greater and lasting value. So I basically quit with an idea in mind of doing good. And I had been a public management program graduate, and so I remembered the promises I made then about actually being in public service. So I leapt out, and I did two things. One is I reconnected with Stanford, and I was very fortunate to be one of the leadership lab instructors in the new curriculum, which was fabulous, and reconnecting with an institution like Stanford was huge. The other thing is I basically started volunteering, and I stuffed envelopes, and I served meals, and did whatever really was needed to be done in the nonprofit that I was volunteering in. But after a while, you can only stuff so many envelopes, and then you wonder, maybe I could make a bigger contribution. And it occurred to me that I could do something with the business skills. But it was very difficult to figure out how to do that. I wanted to have an impact at an operating or strategic level, but in between being a volunteer or asked to raise money on the board is a huge field of contribution. But how to do that was a mystery. Then I got lucky, and Hewlett-Packard, my former employer, asked if I would participate in a pilot program in the Bay Area called Encore Fellows, which would basically match kind of late career executives with local nonprofits in high-impact strategic jobs. And I got matched with this fabulous school reform agency in downtown San Francisco serving underserved schools, K through 3. And was working on a performance management system for them and a bunch of different things. And then I got an opportunity to be their acting executive director, which was so much fun, and really get to use all those skills that I'd accumulated. After that, I finished that, and 20 months later, the sponsoring organization, which runs the program, called Civic Ventures, asked me if I would actually take that program national. So it wouldn't just be a pilot for a few people, lucky people like me, but if people could do this all over the United States. So that's what I'm doing, and I want my lucky experience to become an opportunity for a pathway for a lot more people who want to have that impact. So that's my story.
So 3 years ago, we had the opportunity to work with Mercy, who inspired Jim and I to create a course for the Stanford Business School alumni who were within 5 years of retiring. And we've now given that course for 3 years. That's where we met Arthur, who is our poster child of someone who has composed their life well. And so we have developed a series of experiences to take people through the process of getting in touch with meaning and purpose. By the end of the day and a half, people have, through lots of different lenses, developed a mission statement and a roadmap. One of the things we have learned is that you can't wait till you're completely done and retired to start the process of composing the rest of your life, as you can hear in all of these stories. And so what we would like to do, Jim's going to talk a little bit about the sort of the legacy and the bigger impact. And then we're going to hear their stories again from that lens. Thank you.
So in putting together this workshop, among the other issues that came up, had to do with legacy. What is a legacy? And how does one define one's legacy? Well, legacy, if you look in the dictionary, of course, means something that's left behind. And I don't mean stuff. We all have plenty of that we leave behind, I'm sure. But we found it useful to think of legacy in multiple dimensions. There's a personal legacy, a familial or family legacy, a community legacy. There may be an institutional legacy, and for some, a global legacy. So you have different levels, different ways of thinking about, almost like concentric circles. At the core, of course, is one's personal legacy. And that is truly unique to each of us. It's the compilation or the aggregation of the values and the actions that we have taken during our lives and that survive us or that are transmitted into the future. That requires a fair amount of reflection and thought. And as Lili just said, it helps to start thinking about that before you are right at the point of transitioning on, shall I say. Much of legacy, the kind of work I do with my clients, has to do with both a financial and a values legacy for their family. So what is it that we want to pass on to our next generation, typically our children? A lot goes into that, of course, and there's always the question of whether the student is ready for the teacher to appear. People can only hear things in their own time and space, but nonetheless, planning to leave a legacy at the familial level is something that most of us will want to give some thought to. Community legacy. You've heard already about some of our panelists who have involved themselves in their local communities. And there are actually ample opportunities. Civic Ventures is one of the key organizations that we reference in our workshop. But there are local community foundations, there are nonprofits, there are for-profits. There are many ways to leave a community legacy. Institutional. Arthur mentioned Stanford, and we, Lili and I, obviously feel a deep connection to the GSB and to the university. So we have been for many years involved in attempting to create a legacy, both while living and that will survive us in a financial and a values sense, to an institution we feel very connected to. There are other institutions. I was involved with the East Bay Community Foundation for nearly 10 years. That's an institution I feel very concerned about and have done what I can to provide for a legacy there. And finally, a global legacy. That really is an opportunity to let your mind expand. What kind of a global legacy can you leave? I still have connections with the people on Ponape Island in Micronesia, where I spent the 2 years as a Peace Corps volunteer over 40 years ago. Our son, our oldest son, just returned from his Peace Corps experience in Ghana, where he spent over 2 years. And he still is in connection. Of course, it's still fairly new, but I feel very hopeful, and I think it's very likely that he will maintain a lifetime connection with the people that he established rapport and a relationship with. So, on all those different levels, expanding from the core out, it's possible to have a legacy and to be thoughtful about what that legacy will be. And now we'll turn to the panel and we'll ask them to share with us their thoughts about legacy and what their legacy means to them.
You're looking at me. Okay.
Shall we just start again with Arthur and go back?
Well, I think it's important to realize at the outset that when you're younger and you're working hard, you're putting your all into your career, and you don't really have an opportunity or even think about stepping back and considering things like legacy and the future and so forth, but it's important. I was a management consultant I had a practice for a number of years after I left Levi Strauss, and it was marvelous. I really enjoyed the contact with various people and outside organizations. And I used to say sometimes to my clients, particularly when they were CEOs, what do you want to do? What do you personally want to do? And very often they think that was totally irrelevant, but it's not. It really isn't, because if you can consider yourself and try to rid yourself of denial, of self-denial, and think about what, I've talked about this before, what the core of you really is. Whatever that core is, I try to talk to younger people about this, my own family, and others I've been involved with over the years. If you can figure out the essence of you, what it is in you which is inviolate, that nobody can tamper with, that makes you you, then you're way ahead of the game here in life. Because if you have that understanding, then I've said before, you've got it all. You can operate from that core, which gives you such self-confidence. And it is, in a sense, a probing self-analysis. It may not come at once if you have a mind to it, but it can emerge over a period of time. I used to take a legal pad and write on it about the things that were important to me. And out of that emerged my interests, my core interests. We often make the mistake of thinking that our particular job is our identity. It's not. It's not. You have an identity that is solely yours, that is unique. And if you can determine what that is, then you can go anywhere, do anything you want to do with confidence. My own self-analysis took some time, and I began to plan before I retired. I've been retired since 1991. It's a long time. I mean, it really is. And I began to think about what it was I wanted to do after my professional career. And I began with certain projects before I retired. And that way you kind of get a running start on yourself. All of us in this room, for example, have a unique and extraordinary connection with this institution, with Stanford. There are so many ways, if you can't figure out specifically what path you want to take, there are many, many ways you can become involved and act out your interests through your connection with Stanford. I chose Stanford ACT a long time ago, the Alumni Consulting Team. Most of you know what that is. I've done a lot of projects, all kinds of projects for Stanford ACT. For those of you, does everybody know what Stanford ACT is and does? I'm sure you do. But we try to organize into teams graduate MBAs who are out in the world and who are running their own businesses. Some of them are running very large businesses, some small. And they come in, and we do pro bono management studies of worthy nonprofits in Northern California. And it's a marvelous outlet. It certainly was for me. And I'm just offering that as an example of what might be done. But it all begins knowing what it is you want to do. Am I running out of time for myself? Okay. Yep. All right. Then I'll pass it on to my betters here, and we can.
We'd love to have a program just for you, Arthur.
Okay.
Okay, well, I guess in my case, I didn't really consciously set out to create a legacy. And my involvement in the world of art came about, from my point of view, completely by chance. But when I look back over the career I had and the choices I made, it almost appears preordained. Because there is a saying that you don't choose art, it chooses you. And when I look back over the positions that I had held, the companies I'd worked for, I'd noticed that while I was always a numbers person, unconsciously, I was choosing organizations that were involved in some kind of artistic pursuit. You know, for example, the Gap stores, the opera company, my apparel distribution company, so on and so forth. So after I sold my business, you know, I was looking around for something to do, and I stumbled completely into what turned out to be a life-changing event. I was looking through the Stanford Continuing Education catalog, and I spotted a chance to study drawing for 5 days in Florence. Now, it wasn't the drawing that interested me. It was being a numbers person, it was the price. Turns out the department was trying out its first program overseas, this continuing education group, and they wanted essentially some people to, you know, go with them who wouldn't be too critical and would give them some feedback. So I ran the numbers. I was just shocked. I couldn't possibly duplicate a trip on my own to Florence for 5 days, let alone, you know, this so-called instruction. And the only catch was I would have to be in a drawing class for half of the time. But I noticed that in the catalog they said, no experience necessary. Now, I believed them. And so in my naivete, I signed up for this class. And then I panicked. And that was more or less the beginning. I went out and I signed myself up for a local drawing class. So I would have a few sessions under my belt before I went to Italy and didn't completely embarrass myself. Well, as it turned out, it takes a lot more than that, as I discovered in Italy. And the experience taught me how much I didn't know, but it was also a really wonderful experience. And that was the beginning, because for the next 6 years, I enrolled in class after class, progressing from drawing to painting to showing my work, and then eventually to selling it. Starting all over in a new field was not only difficult, it was humiliating. Like many of us who have come from careers, I was used to being an authority on my subject. Here, I knew nothing. I had to swallow my pride and subject myself to ongoing criticism all the time in order to advance. For example, it wasn't unusual for an instructor to come over to my work, hold it up for everyone in the class to see, and say, "Class, this is an example of how I don't want you to do this painting." But I kept at it, and as I got to know my instructors, I soon discovered that one of the most difficult things or problems they had was marketing their own work. So even while I was taking classes, and even though I didn't know anything about repping art, I did a little work along these lines on the side in order to help them out. One instructor was so grateful, she invited my husband and me to join a group of 6 artists on a trip to Russia in January of 2001. It was in January because that was a less expensive time to go. Well, this trip turned out to be life-changing. And the connections that I made there, first of all, led to a month-long painting workshop the following year in a really remote village 2 hours north of St. Petersburg by a graduate of the prestigious St. Petersburg Academy of Art. While on that trip, however, I met a wonderful artist named Ivan, for Ivan, we would say Ivan Vituk. And he and his wife and 3 children lived in one room in a Soviet-style apartment on the 7th floor of a building with no elevator. Down the hall was the one bathroom, which was available for every apartment on that floor, and there was only a communal kitchen for each of them to use. Since that trip, I've been committed to doing whatever I can to help this artist. In 2003, thanks to the experience I already gathered a little bit of knowledge in while I was studying art, I was able to get his work carried by a gallery in Scottsdale. And he continues to have an ongoing relationship there. Along the way, this whole process benefited me too, because it led to a friendship between me and the 2 gallery owners and a real inside view of how galleries are run. Ivan and his wife Tanya communicate regularly with me, sending the most charming emails, and I am involved in their life and in that of their 3 children. One of their daughters has a keen interest in art and is showing a lot of promise in becoming an artist herself. I have brought some catalogs along just to show you examples of his work, which you can see afterwards if anybody's interested. A lot of people tell me how much they wish they had artistic talent, that if only they could paint or draw or do some other form of art. But what I really believe is the most important thing is this MBA itself, because this is what gives you the freedom to follow and contribute meaningfully to any field that you are drawn to. Even without working as an artist, you can befriend an artist. You can help them market their work, expose them to new opportunities. Artists are notoriously poor at business, and many exceptionally talented artists just never go out and show their work. Some are embarrassed to ask money for the work that they produce. If you wish to get involved in this work, there's really no shortage of interesting possibilities, and you will meet a whole slate of new and interesting people with different worldviews, and it will be life-changing. I belong to a number of professional art organizations, such as Oil Painters of America, National Impressionist Society, and so on. There's nothing more fun in this world I've entered than being able to attend their annual conferences, which are so different from the business ones I used to attend. Vendors bring paintbrushes, they bring frames, all the lectures are about art. You can meet and mingle with highly accomplished artists whose work you admire. It's like being in a candy store. So the only thing I would say is if you are showing an inclination toward one area or another of interest, go in and investigate, get started early. There's no time to waste. You will be the beneficiary. And it's just the most wonderful life you can imagine.
Thank you, Pat.
Like Pat, I'm not sure that I've thought about legacy per se, although I certainly have given a lot of thought to what retirement is, or maybe more accurately, what retirement isn't. And I'm guessing I could say about most of the people in this room that retirement is not, for example, sitting on the couch, knocking back a few cold ones and watching the soap operas. And I have a very strong sense of obligation that simply because I retired from a formal career, I don't really have permission to sit on the sidelines and watch the world go by. One of the things that I didn't mention earlier, another illustration of my inability to focus, is that I came to the business school as a board-certified pathologist. And both of my parents are physicians, and I have a very strong sense of commitment and responsibility to communal health and well-being, and I'm really moved emotionally by the extreme poor of the world who live on $1 or $2 a day. And so although I spent most of my career in the business of medicine, I had long expected that I would find a way to really contribute and give back. And when we began Project Redwood, for example, I kept saying, it became my mantra, that I wanted to share something of my good fortune, some of my time, and everything of what I've learned. And so whether I'm doing that now in Project Redwood or in terms of a farming heritage, I go at it with kind of those same principles. And I think for all of us, it doesn't really matter what you're pursuing. If it's interesting and you take the point of view that you don't have permission to quit, you have to keep contributing, you will find meaning in your life.
Thank you.
My preparation for the change that I made probably started with some milestones in my life, including turning a certain age, losing 2 parents, having children move on to college or into high school, and suddenly having time to think. And I could have easily kept going at 80 hours a week managing the business, that sort of thing. But I guess I got lucky and I had a chance to reflect. And so that's when I made my decision to try and broaden my life and go do other things, and started to volunteer and that sort of thing. And I would certainly encourage you to go ahead and do that exploration early, so that when you do make your move, you know what you're moving into a little bit at least. Network outside your network. I have had so many people who were in my field in the same position ask me, how do you know when it's time? How do you know when it's ready? And there are a lot of answers. It's all personal. But my normal response is, what are you waiting for? We can keep going, and there's always more money to be made and that sort of thing. But I actually got really concerned about the state of the world that we were leaving for my children, grandchildren, and I thought that's the biggest legacy you can make is to actually maybe change the trajectory of some of what's happening. And I felt like there's so much talent, skill, energy in this entire generation that perhaps putting that to work is a big way to give back. So I guess my legacy or my vision or hope would be kind of a redefinition of retirement for many people, as well as a better shot at a better world for our children. And so those are pretty big ones, but got to dream big.
So one of the things that we've learned as we've been creating the curriculum for this Composing the Rest of Your Life is that it becomes very important for all of you to have some models, some examples of people who have done some of that questioning and some of that work. And this panel, I think, is really representative of very different but quite purposeful movement into both steep learning curve and impact. So how is it that each of you got in touch with what it is that created meaning, not necessarily for the future, but now? And as you heard from all of them, this is an ongoing and seamless or seamed process. So it is, the invitation is to do it now. But maybe each of you could tell the audience, one or two? Okay. So which one of you would like to talk about?
I can start.
Do you want to start, Arthur? And then maybe we'll go to Ed.
I'll try to be as brief as possible. I think in terms of living one's life daily, as you get older, you have to begin with energy. And where do you get your energy? And I think that's on 2 levels. At least it is for me. For most of my adult life, I've tried to take care of myself physically. I work out every single day. I meditate. I do it for 30, 35 years. Late in the afternoon, I practice TM, Transcendental Meditation, which is basically a form of self-hypnosis. It gives me peace. It gives me serenity. I said on a video here at Stanford not long ago, when I come home, sometimes I'm tired because I've had a rough day, and Lois says, "We're going out tonight," and I go in there and I do my little TM session, and let me tell you, it is so invigorating. And so I would urge you to, I would urge anyone to treat the machine well, treat the mind well, and the other thing is that your happiness isn't something that you construct logically, you know. If you find out what I was talking about before, if you find out who you are and what your interests are, then you naturally gravitate toward those opportunities which will help you to act out your interests. And if you can do that, I think you can be happy. You're happy. So.
And I might just talk a little bit about, in fact, the last job I had in the pharmaceutical industry as the chief risk officer, and putting together a risk management program, and also about the compliance. I am not a lawyer, but I had worked in a part of the company that had been subject to a federal investigation and a billing irregularity for which the company paid a large fine. And much of the discussion and resolution of that particular suit focused on the medical necessity of certain kinds of laboratory tests. And so at the time, I was actually in the one medical job I had in my career. I was the national medical director for SmithKline Beecham Clinical Labs. And I was sucked into this compliance process in helping us to determine how do you know that a test that a physician has ordered is medically appropriate. And I came out on the other end of that, in the eyes of some, as a compliance officer. The pharmaceutical industry at that time did not really have big compliance programs. And rather unexpectedly, I was offered the opportunity to really establish the compliance program for my company. And as part of that, to set up this risk management program. And in that, we identified the big risks, the $400, $500, $600 million risks that the company was facing, and attempted to mitigate them. And as odd as it seemed as I went into that job, as I was in it for a while, I began to realize that it really was the culmination of many things that I had done in my career. Brought together many things that I learned here and had strong interests in, for example, finance, decision theory, risk analysis, my medical career. And in a funny way, it really brought together many, many things of what I had done throughout my earlier career and what I had learned here. And it was tough because most of these elements were new, and there was a lot of resistance. The sales and marketing folks really didn't like the compliance programs. But you know, I looked at the things that I had done well in and had excelled in and found ways to bring those to the job and to try to create the job in a way that had meaning for me and that I thought would add value to the company rather than to prescribe to any preconceived notions about what the job ought to be. And I think that's true now of what I'm doing. And I don't know that it's really, if you can lay it out as nicely as, and Jim and Lili might like you to be able to do, or Arthur. I mean, I think any ball that came across the plate, I'd probably take a swing at it, and as long as it was interesting to me. But that's an example of one pursuit I had that brought together many things that I had done.
Is there a differentiation between nonprofit work and for-profit activities work in terms of the meaning that one can derive from? Is one or the other more noble or more valuable?
Leslye, do you want to feel that?
That's a good question. I think you could think that's implicit, but I would say no. I think at different stages of your life, and everyone has different values, so I think that the contribution can be and is equally important. In my particular case, I'd had a long career of contribution in one sector, but I wanted to be able to have a different contribution in another sector. So I don't make that judgment at all. And I think that you can have meaning in both, and it's a very personal kind of equation.
Others care to comment?
I'd love to comment on that because well, first of all, when I came to business school, my medical colleagues thought that I was, of course, selling out. And then when I went to work for a commercial clinical laboratory, it was even worse. But over time, I came to realize that, in fact, I was having a much bigger impact on the population of the U.S. because I had oversight and responsibility for testing that was done across the country. And by doing something as simple, for example, as working with our purchasing agents or our technical people to standardize testing so that a CBC in Los Angeles was the same as one done in Philadelphia, and that tests could be compared across populations, really gave a lot of value and brought some standardization to healthcare. And I don't think that has happened yet in the not-for-profit sector. So I think there's a lot of good that comes from working in the for-profit sector. And you know, it didn't take me long to get over that problem. Now, having said that, I love working on the not-for-profit side too, and recognize that we can address certain issues that simply don't get addressed by for-profit enterprises for obvious reasons.
I want to thank you all for coming.